Hey guys, it's Dr. Hayes back again. We're gonna be here talking about African American lit and Jewish American lit, specifically children's lit, obviously. But so for the African American lit, in the intro video, I gave you the quote. I read the quote from W.B. Du Bois's "The Souls of Black Folk" about his idea of double consciousness. So that's something I definitely want us to look at and be thinking about as we talk about African American lit and also the Jewish lit as well. So I have some examples to show you other than the ones you read. You read the John Henry story by Julius Lester, Julius Lester's version. I actually have a very gorgeous picture book version of the same. It's the text you read, the Julius Lester text, but the illustrator is Jerry Pinkney, and he's award winning. This was the honor, the Caldecott honor, as you can see. And so we'll talk about the Julius Lester story in the context of the visual as well. And then you had an excerpt in your text about the Brownies book, the magazine that was published in 1919 1920. I have a printout of like one issue of it, a whole issue. I don't have the same one that you had in your book, and I'm pretty sure I left that book at my office. So I do have this different one that we're going to go through, and I'll just point out a few things about it. But the editor of this was W.B. Du Bois, coincidentally. So yeah, I told you he was a big name. So we'll talk about the Brownies book real quick, also, and then when we move on, we'll talk about the Diary of Anne Frank and some of the implications of that. And that is a very familiar text. A lot of people, you might have even read it before. You might have read excerpts from it before, talked about it before. And so that's not really something that's that unfamiliar, but I did want us to at least mention it as, it's so iconic that it is. So let's see. Yeah. So we're going to talk about John Henry first. So, John Henry was the sort of American legendary figure. And so he is kind of like Paul Bunyan or Pecos Bill or Casey Jones, Johnny Appleseed, like these sort of American tall tale figures. Well, John Henry is a very famous one. He was all of these people were based on supposedly real figures, real people. But as you can read the way that Julius Lester describes him, he's sort of this figure where his reputation has been built up and built up and built up, and so he's become more of like a mythological figure, like Hercules or something. And it's he's sort of famous for this one incident represented in the story. The kind of the big story that everybody knows about John Henry is that he raced the locomotive. The steam locomotive was pile driving, like, hammering in railroad ties to build the railroad, and it was using a machine. And John Henry's whole thing was, I can be faster than the machine. I can do it by hand with my hammer and beat the machine just to show you that I can do it, right? It's a story of ingenuity and sort of this man against machine, and it's also a statement about the old ways versus the new ways, and sort of this distrust of progress, and this sort of questioning of the industrialization of all sort of processes were being industrialized and mechanized. And so it really is sort of this powerful turning point story in American history by itself. But then the fact that he is an African American man as well. I think some of the legends say, some of the stories you read say that he was a former slave. Some say that he was born from a slave. Just the timeline is not 100% sure about where exactly who this person was and where he started. So the fact that a black man involved so closely in time with the Civil War and like the end of the Civil War, who was well respected and became this legendary figure, is huge. He's a huge heroic figure in African American history and culture and folk culture. And so I wanted to kind of read about you to read the story about him so that you got a sense of that. Like I was talking to my daughter this week. She's in fourth grade. You've all met her, and she had no idea who John Henry was. She'd never heard of him. Honestly, she had never heard of Paul Bunyan. She had never heard of Pecos Bill. She'd never heard of all these people. And so, since we're homeschooling right now because of the quarantine, that's our social studies unit, is I've been exposing her to all of these figures, these tall tale figures of American history. So that's kind of what an impromptu unit that we've been doing at home. But this book about John Henry, I want to show you some of the visuals. Like here's his scene when he was a baby, and all the animals came around and were like, he came out full grown, and like all the animals came around to like witness it. And they were, let's see, it said he grew and grew and he grew until his head and shoulders busted through the roof, which was over the porch. John Henry thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He laughed so loud the sun got scared, right? Like, so I mean, it's just, Julius Lester is really good about those sort of memorable comparisons, those metaphors like that. Oh gosh, I love the personification of the sun. The sun yawned, washed its face, flossed and brushed its teeth, and hurried up over the horizon. I love that. And here's a picture of him, as a young man helping out his parents. But I wanted to get to, there's all these sort of, the story's full of these sort of tall tales of like different things that he did before it gets to the ultimate tale of him, racing the locomotive. This is him. There's this whole part about him racing ferret-faced Freddy, and there's a really interesting depiction of the race there in the book. Let me see. Let me get to the part. So here it is. He's talking about he's going on the railroad, and he's got his sledgehammers made of whalebone, 4-foot handles made of whalebone. And so it's talking about the dynamite. I'm trying to get to a good part. Oh, here's a good picture of him wielding both of his hammers, one in each hand, building the railroad as fast as any man has ever done it, and slamming through the rock and digging through the mountain. And the sounds that they make, and there's a sort of repetition of the ring that his hammers would make. That says the boulder shivered like you do on a cold winter morning when it looks like the school bus is never going to come. Like, that's great. That's such a great imagery that any reader will be like, yes, I know exactly that shiver. I felt that shiver, right? This is an interesting starting around this point when he's doing the boulder. There's this rainbow, and there's a whole part. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, the rainbow's coming through. There's a whole part in the story about a rainbow showed up, and rainbows are always symbolic, we know, of like new beginnings and promises to come. And I was trying to find. There's this one particular. This is a great picture. There's one particular thing where it talks about this one metaphor. Y'all are seeing what I'd be doing in class, like looking through the book and showing you pages I like. So yeah, he finds out that they have a machine, and he wants to race the machine. This is to show you some of the tall tales. So look how big John Henry is, and then look at all the other men. So this is supposed to show you he was like this giant among men. He was larger than life, right? He's a figure. He's not realistic, right? And so that was a kind of image to show you. There's more personification of the sun. The morning when they were going to have their race, it talks about the birds weren't singing and the roosters weren't crowing because they were so nervous. And so the sun didn't hear the rooster, and he wondered if something was wrong. So he rose a couple minutes early to see, right? I just love it. Um, what the son saw, was a mountain as big as hurt feelings. That's big, right? That's a great metaphor too. A mountain as big as hurt feelings. Um, and so John Henry's going to be on one side, and the machine's going to be on the other, and they're gonna try to meet in the middle. Um, they're trying to get through the middle of the mountain to expand the railroad. That's the contest. Um, there's a good picture of John Henry hitting in the mountain, and you see the rainbow. That rainbow is just kind of always there now around John Henry, because spoiler, this is kind of his last moments, right? When he sort of hammers himself to death just to prove a point. They go all through the night, and all through the night, John Henry's hammer is causing like fire to shoot out, and visibly, everybody around could see a rainbow wrapping around the mountain like a shawl. The sun comes up extra early to see who's winning. So at the end of the night, it says John Henry had come 1.25 miles. The steam drill had only come 1/4. So he blasted out of the water, right? So here's sort of this final image where he comes through, and he beats the steam engine, and there's the rainbow there, right? And it says the rainbow slid off the mountain and around his shoulders. With a smile, John Henry's eyes closed, and slowly he fell to the ground. John Henry was dead. He had hammered so hard and so fast and so long that his big heart had burst. And everybody cries and is upset. And then there was this strange thing that happened. Afterwards, folks swore the rainbow whispered it. It says, I don't know, but whether it was a whisper or a thought, everyone had the same knowing at the same moment. Right? They had the same thought. And this is the thought. Dying ain't important. Everybody does that. What matters is how well you do your living. So that's the lesson there. And it was just sort of this knowledge that everyone sort of collectively had all at once as soon as John Henry died, because that was his message. That's how he lived his life. How you live is more important than how you die. So the end, some say he was buried on the White House lawn late one night while the President and Mrs. President was asleep. I don't know about none of that. What I do know is this. If you walk by the White House late at night, stand real still and listen real closely, folks say you just might hear a deep voice singing, and it's singing the rainbow song about, and there's like this shooting star with a rainbow over it. So it's sort of this suggestion that he is a part of America, right? He is this sort of, the way you live is more important than the way you die, that kind of thing. The suggestion is this is a foundation of America. And the fact that some people think he's buried at the White House or under the White House is sort of an indication of how foundational he is to the American spirit and the American dream and the American way of life. So the John Henry, this is just a very poetic, lyrical rendition of it, with the gorgeous illustrations by Jerry Pinkney. But the story was around a long time before Julius Lester's version was. It's it's kind of like this Americana tall tale. But I did want you to read it because a lot of times it's taught to children, and especially African American children, as sort of like, look, we helped build America. We are a very important part of the American story. We're a very important part of the history of this nation, and we have heroes and figures too, kind of thing. And so, as far as double consciousness goes, John Henry was, of African descent, but he's also very much American. And the John Henry story emphasizes more the Americanness of him than it does the Africanness of him. And not to downplay either one, but it's showing that coming from slaves or being born during or close to slavery, having African lineage, that does not make you less American. Being American is an addition to that identity, not a splitting of that identity. And that's kind of the idea of double consciousness as well. So I hope that you kind of take that away from the John Henry story and kind of understand that. Let's talk about the Little Brownies book for something a little bit completely different. So the Little Brownies book, or the Brownies book, not the Little Brownies book, the Brownies book. It was a magazine for children. This is a printout I have of some scans of the entire issue. So that's why it's on this white paper like this, because I printed out scans of a whole issue from May of 1920. It only lasted about a year and a half, and it was okay. So the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP still exists, and W.B. Du Bois used to be the editor of its magazine called The Crisis. I'm pretty sure it was called The Crisis. I didn't look it up beforehand, and I should have. But The Crisis was, and maybe it still is, or it was for a long running magazine for the NAACP that was once a month, and it was just basically an update about the issues of Black people. It had poetry in it. A lot of the Harlem Renaissance poets, Langston Hughes, had poetry in The Crisis, and there'd be articles and a lot of prominent names in sort of the African American art movement, politics, news, all that would update in this magazine. Well, once a year in November, they had a children's issue. So the children's issue of The Crisis was dedicated to children's stuff, children's poetry, pictures of children, artwork, games for children, little like plays that children could memorize and recite. A lot like the Little Pretty Pocketbook or something that had like little poems and plays they could recite, little stuff to do and pictures. But it only ran for, like I said, about 18 months or so. It wasn't a very long-lived project. And W.B. Du Bois was the editor of it. But it's still very impactful in sort of African American history and the development, because it was came out right at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, and it was a crucial even though it was short-lived, it was a crucial publication. And the reason for that, there's a few reasons. One is that it was representation. It was Black children who were seeing themselves in a publication that was coming out. They saw there was pictures of little Black children. There was cartoons. There was profiles of historical figures who were Black, and so it was this sort of very critical example of representation for them in a nationwide magazine. It also was crucial for education, because they were sort of being validated in, like, that they are capable of learning, that they deserve to learn literature, they deserve to learn poetry and plays, they deserve to learn art. It's a valid idea that a reader of this magazine, a small Black child, should be educated and should be thought capable of memorizing poetry and stuff. That was such an amazing idea at the time. I can't emphasize that enough. It seems like obvious now, but it was revolutionary at the time. So even though, it was kind of founded at the wrong place at the wrong time, I guess you could say, for its success, because it was right on the heels of World War One. World War One had just ended. The nation was headed into an economic depression that lasted for quite a while and then took us right into World War Two. So it was kind of doomed, economically speaking, but conceptually and the content was wonderful. It was amazing. So there's a couple things I wanted to point out. For one, this is the May issue, so it has little children participating in a Maypole on the front, but it's Black children, not white children. A Maypole was a classic sort of, it's an ancient pagan practice, but became very popular among the Victorians. So that was significant that little black children were shown dressed up and participating in a traditionally white activity, white upper and upper middle class activity. The front has a whole little, a monthly magazine for the children of the sun. That's what I wanted to point out. That's what they refer to their readers, the children of the sun, which, dark-skinned children, the children of the sun. So I wanted to point that out. That's an interesting way of describing them. So the Brownies book, there's a table of contents here, and it basically had the same features every issue. There was like a poetry section, and a play, a historical profile, a history, letters from readers, photography. So there's like playtime where it has riddles and games, but it has like sort of these recurring features that come through every time that are in every issue. Here is a picture I was going to show you. This is Mr. Rockefeller poses for the caddies at Ormond Beach, Florida. So this is a picture of Rockefeller there, very prominent industrial family, the Rockefellers, who were very wealthy and rich and owned most of everything at the time. So that's Rockefeller, and there's a bunch of boys who are the caddies at this golf club, this country club in Florida. So it seems a little bit derogatory maybe to have like these caddies pose, but no, this would have been something that the readers would have been so proud of, that this very, very important white man would agree to have his photograph along with these young black men here, right? That would have been something that would have been very exciting and validating, that like he was interacting with them, he agreed to have his picture taken with them, he was posing beside them, talking to them, right? That's first page here. This on the first page is a great picture with Rockefeller. So anyway, here's a story. I'm gonna kind of flip through. There's a little short story about fairies, little poems about May and spring. Like the whole thing is, the theme is, spring and flowers and things. Here's a little playlet. So there's little characters, little parts, and like each, like you could, like a school class or something could put it on, like they could memorize and assign parts, and it gave them something to do. And so that play lasts a little while. Here is this is a little bit troublesome because it's a little bit stereotypical, where you have this, it's sort of this poem, what is it called? That meddlesome bird, and this bird is trying to interrupt him while he's taking a nap. So it's kind of, right here. There's this black man right here, if you can see it. He's trying to take a nap under a tree. So some people have pointed out sort of problematic illustrations like that. It's encouraging stereotypes of like laziness and things like that, but I don't think that that's too bad. There's a section here called The Judge, where people write in, and then this one of the the magazine staff sort of gives them a verdict, right? Like solves the problem. Here's the Grownups Corner. So the editors, it says, we have adopted the Grownups Corner for ourselves this month because there are one or two things we wish to say. Perhaps you think that the only sort of letter we care to publish in this department are letters praising this magazine, but that is not the case. Of course, we are always glad to get such letters, very glad and extremely grateful. Getting out a magazine, especially a new kind of magazine, for we believe our venture is unique, is a difficult task, and we are very much helped when someone takes the trouble to tell us that our efforts are appreciated. But we wanted to help along, let's see, okay, let me see, I can't read it. Okay, so the Grownups Corner, they had parents write in and send in pictures of their kids, like in their Easter best. Notice all the kids are in like really nice dresses, they're all wearing white, and they look really well-to-do. So this was something that was another proud thing. These are little black children who they look wealthy, like they're well-to-do, they have pretty dresses, and they're all clean, and and so that would have been a very intentional sort of PR thing, to spread to the readers, like, look, we are legitimate, we're part of society, we know how to dress, we know how to, we have money, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, take with that what you will, but at the time that was very intentional. Here's another one, where it's just pages of nice portraits of black children looking very nice and put together and very clean. Let's see. Here's a whole, like, the history of May and different things that happen in May. I'm not going to try to belong, too long. Beat a dead horse. Oh, here's a list of songs that they could memorize. That was really cool. Oh, here's what I was trying to get to. Here are some artwork that readers did and sent in. It's kind of like Highlights Magazine or something in the back, where it has artwork from readers and children that they would send in, and they would publish it and put their ages there and where they're from. So the children could kind of see themselves being published and participate. Here's the historical profile about somebody called Toussaint Louverture, and here's a picture of him. Right, and here's a little story, little poem called Children of the Sun. Oh, here's Little People of the Month, and it was more pictures of, they focused on these sort of little ballerinas, because their whole theme was fairies and spring and stuff, so they picked pictures of little girls in, like, fairy costumes and ballerina costumes to show. Here's playtime, some African riddles. What house is that without a door? It's an egg. An egg. What house is that without a door? Let's see. What good thing is it that man eats, and which he constantly fastens his eye upon while eating, and then throws half away? A roasted ear of corn. So you're constantly watching it while you eat, and then when you get to the cob, you throw it away. That's pretty good. I whistle, and the people all come running from the forest. What am I? The rain. What throws itself from the mountaintop without being broken or killed? What throws itself from the mountaintop without being broken or killed? A waterfall. I'll just read two more. Who are the twins we always see but they never meet? The twins we always see but they never meet. Ears. Who are the brothers who, though always near, never see each other? The brothers who are always near but never see each other. Eyes. Oh, one more. There is something that travels fast without legs or wings, and no cliff, river, or wall can stop it. Something that travels fast without legs or wings, and no cliff, river, or wall can stop it. The voice, right? Which is very particularly powerful for a magazine about, with literature and stuff. Here's proverbs relating to animals. Here's a history of the first game of marbles. Interesting. Here's a picture of people playing baseball, and the title is just Spring, which is interesting. It's in Delaware. There's one part at the end I wanted to get to. Here's Our Little Friends. This is little readers who have written poetry, and they submit their poetry, and they post it. Okay, so this last section, always at the end of the Brownies book, there was this section called As the Crow Flies. Okay, so you've seen all throughout the magazine there was poetry and songs and little pictures and games and yada yada yada. Very lighthearted stuff. You probably saw something similar in the part you read in the text if you're able to get it. And some of the issues, it might even have been earlier in this one, there's like a little nutrition section, like these are the things to eat to, try to eat more of these things and less of these things and you'll healthy and strong. But anyway, it's pretty lighthearted and just sort of meant to be entertaining. Well, then every issue had this As the Crow Flies section, which was news. So there's this character, this crow, who flies across the world and takes a look at the little kitties, the poor little kitties of Austria and Poland and Russia, and how they suffered and starved, and how they welcomed the spring. So then he this crow figure reports the news from around the world. We're not lighthearted anymore when we get to this section, because it's talking about nearly all the governments of the world are beginning to show a willingness to make peace with Russia. And so it goes through this whole thing about Russia and the tyrant in Russia. Then there's another bullet. There has been trouble in South America between Chile, Peru, and Bolivia because Chile seems determined to hold certain territory on the Pacific Ocean, which shuts Bolivia out from the sea. A revolution is reported in Nicaragua and Honduras in Central America. Most of the people there are colored, and trouble has often been fomented by Americana and other white people. Germany is going to buy the Prussian railroads for $8.5 billion. A great railroad strike is attempted in France. The population of Puerto Rico, which is largely colored, has increased 15.9% since 1910. Let's see, I'm going to skip. The Allies decided that Turkey should be stripped of all her territory in Europe except Constantinople and Adrianople, and that Thrace and Smyrna, be under the Greeks. Blah, blah, blah. The Russian Bolsheviki have made a vigorous attack upon the Poles because Poland has been extending her boundaries eastward. More about that. This one's about the Italian government has decided to buy no more tobacco from the United States. This is to cut down on the number of unnecessary imports because Italy is not exporting enough to pay their debt. Then it has a whole thing about the debt of English and France. This is not stuff children care about. I mean, I know I was reading through that, but it's like, what? And there's a whole other page. There's a thing on the second page about how many people have died. Here's a report. The United States House of Representatives wants a standing army of 299,000 men with 17,820 officers. The measure is now before the Senate. This is not for children. It talks about how much money the United States is spending on income tax. It talks about there was this one coup, I read it earlier, and how many people died because of this battle. There's some schools closed. It looks like in the United States, throughout the country, their schools closed. 50,000. Oh, here we go. 50,000 bodies dead. 50,000 bodies of dead American soldiers will be returned to the United States, while 25,000 will remain buried in Europe. That's talking about World War I. So the reason I bring all this up is because I have a little bit of a theory about the Brownies book. So the NAACP was a very prominent public, and it still is, organization, right? And its magazine, The Crisis, was also very prominent and long-running and widely read. So my suspicion is that it was getting a little bit too much attention. So the whole point of Du Bois and the NAACP officers, and the whole point of the thing is they're wanting to legitimize being black. They're wanting to legitimize black art, to uplift and bolster their children, the children of the sun, and to educate them. And part of their mission was for that black people throughout the country needed to be informed, to be educated, to be informed of current events, to know what's going on, not to be kept in the dark, right? Just to go about. They didn't believe that black people should just go about their business. They should be all completely involved in what was happening. That was their sort of political stance. And so if they the magazine for adults was being sort of monitored and paid attention to by maybe certain entities that did not want such an advancement of minorities, specifically African Americans, to happen. Because this is during the Jim Crow era, leading up to when the Jim Crow, like the segregation, like white water fountain, colored water fountain, seats on the bus, all of that. This was leading right up into that. And so my theory is that the children's magazine, it might not have been founded specifically for this purpose, but a nice silver lining of having a separate magazine for children is that powerful people who were sort of watching the politics of this were not paying attention. Like, oh, that's just a kiddie book. If you start flipping through it, it's got, cartoons, and it's got games and riddles and pictures of kids. It's very innocuous, very unassuming, very non-threatening, right? This magazine. But the last 2 pages in this teeny tiny type that's even decorated with kind of a cartoon, you'd have to really be paying attention to this teeny tiny updates to see, oh, they're spreading the word, right? They're using this children's magazine to sort of get the word out. Be like, oh, you might not have access to this news anywhere else, and we're trying to cut down on it in the adult magazine to try to get some attention off. But now we can spread the news to the families in our readership without so much attention being paid. We can sort of quietly educate our populace and educate our readership and keep them informed on political things that were happening. I think it's kind of a genius move. It's regrettable that it didn't last longer than it did. I mean, maybe it didn't need to. Like, maybe it served its purpose for the time that it existed, which is very possible. Yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit about the Brownies book. I've been fascinated by this sort of little publication for a long time. I kind of came across this in grad school and was like, what? This is cool. So I looked into it and looked at a bunch of old issues and looked for patterns. And yeah, the crow flies section always fascinated me. But I wanted to show you a few other examples of African American children's lit that I have, just so that you can kind of get an example. This is an interesting, kind of while we're on the sort of John Henry African American folktale kind of a thing. This is a collection. I don't know if you've ever heard of Uncle Remus. Uncle Remus is kind of like the Aesop's fables of the American South, if you will. Maybe even some people have equated the Uncle Remus character with the Mother Goose character. When we talked about fairy tales, we talked about, Charles Perrault, this sort of French aristocrat, was Mother Goose, he was publishing as Mother Goose. That wasn't a real character. Well, Uncle Remus, his famous characters are like Brer Rabbit, and there's this a fox and a wolf, and Brer Rabbit was his most famous character. You might have heard stories about Brer Rabbit, but it's just this collection of all of these folk tales. I'm in the introduction, and just look, there's just tale. Almost all of them are about animals. But look at the contents. It's just full of these stories of these animal characters, Brer Rabbit and his friends. And you have this image in the front where it's like Uncle Remus tells a story to a little boy, and look at the little boy with his little Lord Fauntleroy haircut and his little breeches. So, and Uncle Remus is this sort of kindly old black gentleman. You have this sort of the stereotypical figure of the magical Negro who gives advice, just kind of appears and gives wisdom and then disappears. You have this kind of this figure, and so Uncle Remus is this character who supposedly this wise old black man who has all these folk tales about Brer Rabbit and the wolf and the bear and all of these different figures. Well, Uncle Remus is a character just created by Joel Chandler Harris. Joel Chandler Harris is white. He was a white man. He was not black. And so there's a whole sort of seedy history. I don't have time to get into it. We didn't even read this for today, but I want to just kind of tell you, if you're interested in that kind of thing, if you want to look more into it, look more into Uncle Remus, the whole Uncle Remus phenomenon, and Joel Chandler Harris, and be entertained by that. I have a few other things here. A very famous book, Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters, by John Steptoe. It's won awards. It's gorgeous. This is a book that's like set in Africa. It's not African American, but it's about African culture and African folklore. So, but it's just beautiful. Another one I have is the Iroko Man, a Yoruba folktale, which is Yoruba is a tribe in Africa. But look at the author, Phyllis Gershader. That does not sound very Yoruban, I guess is what I'm saying. So something that interests me about these books is who's creating them, right? Who's the author? Who's the illustrator? I don't have pictures of them. I don't know much about them, but that's something to think about. Is who do these sort of do ethnic / cultural tales belong to a specific group? Is it okay for authors and illustrators not from that people group to represent those tales? On the one hand, if they didn't, we wouldn't have them some of the times. For the longest time, publishing companies would not invest money in minority authors and illustrators. So white authors and illustrators were kind of sort of took up the responsibility of writing these stories and illustrating these stories. That's not as much the case anymore, but it's not the case either. It's still really hard. The vast majority of books published in children's literature and adult literature, but I know more about children's literature, by far are by white authors. So yeah, it's just the big question is, who do these belong to? Some more tales set in Africa, bringing the rain to the Kapiti Plain. Art about Africa. I have lots of these. On the same day in March, here's a tour throughout the world of like different places in the world of like what a different day in March looks like. It's gorgeous. Let me see. Those might be all my Africa books, but I have these. I have another one. I have a couple more these are just sort of like celebrating diversity, and it's all about the different colors of skin and the different places that people are from. I love these little books. These are very well done little books. I also have I don't have as many of these, but there are historical books written for children. Like this one's about Martin Luther King Jr. And it's kind of about his life, and it's more of a biography, a picture book biography of Martin Luther King. There's tons of these. You could fill a whole stack of just books about Martin Luther King Jr. But there's other figures like Rosa Parks and Malcolm X and things like that. I have oh gosh, I'm gonna actually save this for a different day. I have this book that I always like to show during this unit because it's called Excellent Ed, and it's about this dog that's like this weird dog. And what's great about this is that the family that owns Ed is a black family. You have the sort of typical black family. The girl has braids. The older son has cornrows. They sort of present in sort of this classic African American way. But there's no mention that Ed was owned by a black family, right? Like it's not like made a big deal of. It's just this is a book about a dog who gets into shenanigans, and his owners are this black family, right? It's just so no big deal, right? It's not a book about civil rights. It's not a book about the plight of being a minority. It's about this funny dog and his owners happen to be black. So I wanted to show this as sort of this full circle of where we've come, right? Of like representation in children's lit. And the Snowy Day that we talked about in the picture book unit is very similar. Peter, the little boy in Snowy Day, he's a little black boy, but he's never described like that. He just is. He's just a black boy, right? Out playing in New York. And so that's sort of the culmination of that's what we want to see more of. We don't want to ignore that, the history, the past, the experience of the civil rights, the Civil War period pieces. We don't want to ignore that, but the idea is eventually to transcend those books about being black or being Jewish or whatever, and to move on into books that are just have characters that are of color, and that's not even what the book's about. So I like to show this book just as an example of that. There's this other I just want to show you this. We were talking about Brownies books. I have a few copies of this other magazine that came later called Ebony Jr. And it was, it was very sort of a modern version. The back always has like pictures that readers have submitted and sent in, and it has artwork, and and it just shows I don't know, it's got recipes. There's like little comic strips and little science lessons, and this is a game to do with shells. There's a crossword in it. It's just like a little magazine. The theme of this one is food, and so there's like, here's about this guy who's a chef and all about his life. So it's just interesting. Since we talk about Brownie book, I thought I would show you Ebony Jr. One more thing for picture books. I know this is going long, so I'll probably separate out the Jewish one, but there's this book this was my copy when I was a kid, but this book called Little Black Sambo, and it's about this character, and it's this folk tale about how he is very proud of his clothes, his pretty clothes, and he goes and these tigers are there, and they basically trick him one by one. They threaten him, and he loses all of his clothes because they say they're going to eat him, and so he ends up with nothing, and he's sad. And they're wearing all his clothes, as you can see. Well, they end up taking them off for some reason, I forget, to like take a nap or whatever. Oh, that was me, I colored in this. But they start chasing each other around this tree. And he watches them, and he like says something to like distract them and to get them mad or something, and they start chasing each other around this tree, and they chase and chase and chase, and while they're distracted, he gets all his clothes back, and they turn to butter. And then his dad comes with a bucket, and they scoop up the butter and go put it on pancakes. It's the weirdest book, but I loved this book when I was a kid. Well, the same pair, I wanted to show you this because the John Henry book, Julius Lester, Jerry Pinkney, they did the same, they paired up again, and they retold the story, but it was Sam and the Tigers, and it's like a New Orleans jazz type of aesthetic, with the whole umbrella, and I just want to show you a couple of the images, but it's real weird because there are animals, like that's a crocodile in a suit, and so there's like animals who are dressed up and who live amongst the people, very like folklorish, but the imagery is very similar with him and his green umbrella and all, and the tigers take it. And here's almost the same exact picture from the other original of them putting his clothes on, and then let's see him. Then when they turn into butter, right? And his dad comes and they get the butter, and his mom makes pancakes, and they have a big old party. Look, their friend Giraffe came over, and they have a party with all their friends. It's just bizarre. So if animals are sentient in this world and wear clothes and go to the market and come over for pancake supper, that means that the tigers, eating the liquefied tiger butter is like cannibalism almost, like they're eating like people. It's just so weird, but I just thought I would show you that because Little Black Sambo was one of my favorites growing up. I'm going to show you just a few more things for older readers, and then we'll be done with this video, and I'll do a different one about Jewish and Frank and Jewish literature. So there is so here's a book, William Armstrong, Sounder. You might have read this in school. It was a Newbery winner, and it's a boy and his dog type of book, but I think it's his dad's a sharecropper. I was like, there's something about, it's like set in rural, it's in the South, and It's kind of a sad book, but it's a one that a lot of times kids read in elementary school because it's very thin and easy to read. But Sounder's a big one, Newbery winner. So there's this author, Walter Dean Myers, and I think I only have a couple books by him. Slam, Sunrise Over Fallelujah. He also wrote a book called Monster, which is very, very popular. I think it won the Prince Award, which is like a teen book award. But Walter Dean Myers fills a very important author demographic, which is he writes books that older African American males are attracted to. That is the hardest demographic to get to read. African American older males, like when I say older as in children, like teenagers, like African American teenage boys is the hardest demographic to get to read and to be interested in reading. So Walter Dean Myers is a very significant author in the field because his books specifically appeal to African American teen boys. Not that anybody else can't read them, but that's who they're sort of geared to. Another very important author is Christopher Paul Curtis. So I have a whole bunch of Christopher Paul Curtis books. Some of them are historical fiction. Some of them are modern. Something you might have encountered is a Newbery winner and a Coretta Scott King winner. That's the African American Lit Award. Bud Not Buddy. That is a classic sort of coming of age. It's set in Flint, Michigan in the 1930s, so that's interesting for you. And it's sort of this growing up story, and it's a lot of times because it was so well received, and again it's not super long, it's a lot of times assigned for like a middle grades school project or something. Bud Not Buddy. So if you're interested in that, that's one for you. Then probably Christopher Paul Curtis' most famous book is The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. So it's this story about this family who go on a road trip into the city. They go to Birmingham just for a visit, and it happens to be they get there on the same exact day as the bus riots, when you see all the footage of like the police like hosing people down with fire hoses on the street, and it's just chaos. Like that was in Birmingham in 1963, and it's about this family who go on a road trip and they end up there during that time, and it tells all about their experiences in Birmingham in 1963. It's a fictional, like a story about this family with characters and stuff, but it does represent a real time in history, in the history of the civil rights. So that book has been celebrated. I think it was a Newbery honor, and it was a Coretta Scott King honor. So that's big. Another big name in African American children's lit is Mildred Taylor. This is her book Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. It's very influential in children's lit. It's just absolutely wonderful. It was the Newbery winner, and there was a whole series with the same family she wrote. This was just the first one, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, but there's a whole series with the same family. They're sharecroppers in the South, and it's all about their experiences when the children going to school, and like their school is a lower quality than the white school, and the text, they have hand-me-down textbooks that are falling apart from the white school. Their bus, it's just all these different things, and like the experience. There is a sort of a triggery scene. There's a lynching scene that the kids witness in the book. So it's heavy. It's not lighthearted. It's a heavy book, but it's so good. The last author I'll mention, who I just love, is Jacqueline Woodson. She's written so many books. I have several. I have a few others over in another part of my shelf because they're about homosexual issues, and so I'll talk about those at a different time. But Jacqueline Woodson has written a few different things. Here's a couple of hers. Feathers is one. Hers are more for like older readers, like teenagers. Feathers. This one, it's a really quick read. Look how short it is. If You Come Softly. It's about a high school mixed race couple where there's a white girl and a black boy, and they start dating, and it's not what you think. It's like, oh, usually you think, oh, he's from the ghetto and he's dating this white girl. No, he's very, very wealthy. His dad is like a Spike Lee-esque famous Hollywood director. So he's very, very wealthy, and she's from a lower class. And so the class difference is switched. The race card is there. So this book is just it's very wonderfully written and unique. And then Jacqueline Woodson also wrote this book. It was a Newbery Honor book. It was a Coretta Scott King winner, National Book Award winner. People love this book. Brown Girl Dreaming is what it's called. And it is basically an autobiography, sort of, in poems. So it's a book of autobiographical poems called Brown Girl Dreaming. So you can kind of just see the poems there. And it is amazing, right? So if you're interested in reading more of this kind of book and you don't want the little kid stuff, and you don't really want the historical stuff, Jacqueline Woodson is a great place to start. Okay, so I think I'm going to end this here finally. I didn't get to Anne Frank and the Jewish Lit. I'll make a separate video about that so that maybe the download speeds won't be too long. So you can kind of watch these on your own time, and we can discuss a couple things when we meet up in Discord. So that's all I have for the African American Lit. I'll just stay tuned for the Jewish Lit video, and I will see you guys in class. All right, bye.